Hi, I'm Jim Doti, and welcome to Dialogue with Doti and Doge.
It's great to be here, Jim.
It's great to have you with us, Kristina. We're going to have a great show.
Well, we are. You and I are going to be around for the next 40 years, so I am interested to hear what our guest is going to have to say about that.
Speaking of the next 40 years, we will have a guest that is talking about his recent book, which is The Next 100 Million, America in 2050. And he's a journalist. He's considered an urban expert, a political, economic, global expert, trends going on there, and I'm really proud that he is a presidential fellow in urban futures right here at Chapman University. That's why when I see all your articles, Joel Kotkin, I'm very proud because I always see that Chapman imprimatur. And most recently, I'm reading my Smithsonian magazine. Interesting issue. It's all about what's going to happen in the next 40 years, and you have one of the lead articles.
Yeah, I had to share it with the president, unfortunately.
Yeah, but I think you preceded the president's column or article in that issue. But think of it, 100 million more people in 40 years, 2050, that's 40 years away, that's 100 million more people. So you're saying we're going to be going from 300 million to 400 million.
Right.
That's not, that's coming from forecasts that are generally recognized. But the question I have is, with so many nations now in stagnation in terms of population increase, most countries in Europe are actually experiencing population decline. China, with its one child per family policy, will be experiencing population decline. Singapore is stagnant. Why in the US will we be increasing in 40 years by, you're talking about 33%, big increase?
Well, one of the big factors obviously is immigration. The United States takes immigrants, most immigrants of any country. That's one big factor. Second factor is we have more space. People who have single family homes are more likely to have children than people living in cramped apartments. Big factor is religion. 60% of Americans think religion is important. In countries like Japan or France or Italy, it's 10 to 15%. Religious people have more children than secular people. So those are three big factors.
We're not talking about Catholics, because you just mentioned Italy, which has one of the lowest birth rates, and
they're all most of them are Catholics.
Roman Catholic.
Yes. But of course, there are Catholics and there are Catholics.
And there are Christians and evangelical Christians, right?
Evangelicals, Mormons, even let's say in the Jewish community, the Orthodox much more likely to have big families than the Reform or the secular. Whatever it is, there's something in the United States that leads people to want to have more kids. They're not having huge families. I mean, the size of the families are not large as they were, let's say, 30 years ago. But the American birth rate is basically held up much better than any advanced industrial country.
So how much is it our self-propagation versus the immigration? What percentages?
Well, the immigration's probably at least around 50%, because it's not just the immigration, it's the children of the immigrants, because the immigrants' children are also more likely to have children. But the white native-born birth rate in the United States is considerably higher than their counterparts in Europe or in East Asia.
Now you paint this population increase in a very positive way, which is interesting, because in today's recession or post-recessionary environment where we're dealing with 10%, almost 10% unemployment, people are wondering, my goodness, that many more people, how are we going to be able to absorb them, create enough jobs and so on, but yet you see it positively.
Well, here's the big problem. What's your alternative? If you don't have children, then you have a radically aging population. You look at 2050, you look at 40% of the population over 65 in countries like Japan and Germany. There's no way you can make that work financially. You can't have that many retired people and that few number of people who are working. You go to 2050 from 2000, US workforce goes up 42%. The Japanese workforce declines by 40%. The European workforce by 25%. Even today, I would argue to some extent, the European debt problem has its roots in both the welfare state and in an aging population. In Greece, people were retiring at 52, 53, 54, and there weren't enough
young people supporting them.
Exactly.
Wow.
Right.
And then the young people are the entrepreneurs. I mean, one of the great pleasures of teaching here at Chapman is my students are always an inspiration. Very often when I'm, talking about the book, there are things that come out from my students, like, for instance, in the situation with China. One of my students who's Chinese did a report on the demographics of China and where it's leading. And so I learned a lot from her. And these young people, they see things in a very different way, and they're a constant inspiration.
They are. They breathe so much life into us. So where will the influx of immigrants come from primarily, or is it dispersed quite a bit?
Well, you know, I think a lot of it depends on policy. There's a big argument going on right now, and one is we'll continue the way we're going now, which is mostly family reunion. Many people feel we should be more like Australia or Canada and have more favoritism towards skilled immigrants, because many people in India or China, in the Middle East, in Europe, would come to the United States if they had the opportunity. And there's a really interesting argument going on whether we're taking too many unskilled or relatively unskilled people,
right,
and not taking enough skilled people.
And
Well,
that
we have
brings
to-
up the whole issue of illegal immigration. I sense from the book that you're very positive about immigration and the impact it has on the economy. Do you feel the same way about illegal immigrants?
I think that's a much more of a mixed picture. First of all, the very act of being illegal has a undermining factor in the society. And the other question is many of the illegal immigrants are not highly skilled, and they're going to have a hard time, and many times their children will have a very hard time. So I think that I'm much more favorable to legal immigration and even having very flexible legal immigration rates. Because, you know, after all, somebody who's an immigrant is by very nature, like, I don't know, certainly my grandparents, they had a little bit of moxie to come over and you know, leave Europe and come here. And the same thing's true of somebody who leaves their home in China or Singapore or in Great Britain and comes to the United States. How many of the very skilled, smart people you know in this country are themselves immigrants?
Where do you think these people are? We're talking about 40 million people. Where will they live?
Well, I think increasingly immigrants are, first of all, the majority of immigrants now live in suburbia. Because when they come to America, they don't want, you know, some guy who's coming from Singapore, he's not coming so he can live in a box. He wanted to live in a box, he could stay in Singapore, you know.
Yes,
So
yes.
they're coming to the suburbs. They're beginning to go into the middle of the country. There are parts of the United States which had very few immigrants that now have lots of immigrants. Charlotte, North Carolina, a friend of mine is now developing a Latino shopping center in Charlotte, North Carolina. Houston
Interesting.
was not a big immigrant city. Now it's got a higher rate of immigration than Chicago does.
What about the Midwest, Kansas, Nebraska? Do you see a renaissance or resurgence of population growth in those areas?
Oh yeah, you're seeing it, but particularly I do a lot of work in the Dakotas. And you're seeing a significant growth of people coming into the Dakotas. There's a huge oil boom going on, for instance, in North Dakota. People who are coming from Mexico or from other parts of the world are going to North Dakota now as a positive net migration in. So I think that what you're seeing is that they're beginning to move into the middle of the country. You know, they're beginning to get some information that right now probably the best regions in the United States right now economically are from Texas to the Dakotas, which area I call the zone of sanity, because it's an area with it's business friendly. They still want to grow. Housing is very inexpensive. And so lots of people are going to those parts of the country, and we're starting to see immigrants. I get emails from people about, oh, my town in Kansas, we were dying, we didn't have any people, and now we have all these immigrants who've come in.
Yeah. Does your research focus on where we are lacking on intellectual capital, where we might use, you know, like sciences or engineering or whatever, where we might need more of those people from certain parts of the world?
Definitely,
Asia, or?
definitely. I think the United States needs, this is why we talked about immigration policy. The United States definitely needs to be able to be a place where, let's say, a skilled engineer from India can say, you know what, we want you here.
Yes.
And we have to fix our own schools. I mean, here at Chapman, we really get the cream of the crop. So, you know, my students, and particularly in the honors program, you couldn't ask for better. But let's face it, a lot of the kids who are coming out of our schools, I live in Los Angeles, you know, I was just at a program discussing this, 50% of those kids don't even graduate high school. Well, what happens to them? And I'm sure there are parts of Orange County where you have the same phenomena.
You know, I opened up my Wall Street Journal last week, and here a lead op-ed piece that you had written, which really argued against, I think, a belief on the part of many urban economists that there's a renaissance of the inner city. But you argued against that. You felt that the data simply do not support population growth in the cities. Can you expand upon that?
Well, basically what I was saying is, one, that there's been an exaggeration. The cities are doing better, which is great, than they were in the 1970s, which was their nadir. But now the claim is, well, people are leaving the suburbs, moving to cities, and the data just doesn't support that. I also think many cities built, and it's even true here in Orange County, people built high-rise condos thinking that there would be this great market, people would give up their single-family homes and move to the condos. That didn't happen. And there are some empty ones that I've noticed here in Orange County, and there are lots of empty ones in cities all over
Call them
America.
see-through condos, see-through townhomes. Speaking of Orange County, how does Orange County fit into this milieu? Is it a county? Is it an urban area of the future? Is it dying? Does it represent really the trend of the future?
Well, it certainly represents a lot of where we're going, which is not really urban, not really suburban. Some people have used the term post-suburban.
Yeah.
It's suburban in its pattern, mostly cars, people living largely in single family and relatively low density, but at the same, and no real downtown, lots of little
34 cities.
and lots of different pockets of activity, but a lot going on. More people come into Orange County to work than go out. So in many ways, it's a model for where cities are going all over the world, frankly, and certainly here in the United States and throughout North America. Orange County has a great problem, as does every place in California, which is we have a government regulatory environment that is just scaring away investments. Entrepreneurs are going elsewhere. They may keep their headquarters here, but they're going to expand somewhere else, whether it's overseas. And if that continues, we're going to have a very serious problem, even in a place as wealthy and as blessed as Orange County.
Right. I would think that in this world where it's harder and harder for us to maintain our privacy, people would want more room and more space, though. Back to your high-rise example, they want to be more in a place where they can get a little bit more privacy.
Well, the privacy, and then what they want is they also want the amenities. So in the book, The Next 100 Million, I talk about how communities like, let's say, Irvine, give people the opportunity for that privacy, but also lots of things to do, lots of things, places to shop. And I think Irvine will develop more of those urban amenities over time. So I think that it's a kind of blending of the two that is really the wave of the future.
Joe, is the melting pot that many people really point to as the secret of America's success, is that still working?
Oh, it's a fantastic story. It's something I also talk about in the book. The rate of intermarriage between races, let's say in a place like California, it's about 13–14% of all marriages are interracial. When I was growing up in New York, if an Irish person married an Italian, that was sort of.
And now you're talking about interracial, which in parts of the country would be illegal.
Right, and now it's extraordinarily common.
I would have even thought the number would be higher, though, because people don't pay attention to that nowadays, at least not my generation.
Well, it's probably higher if you consider multi, it's such a mix now, you don't even know.
It's true.
And I certainly see with my students, I don't think anyone ever says, oh, I'm not going to date that boy because he's Chinese, or I'm not going to date that girl because she's African American.
Right.
And look, the President of the United States is a product of a mixed race marriage himself.
Yeah, that's right.
So, I mean, this is, I always think that.
So you're saying the melting pot's working better than ever?
And I think that if you took somebody from a time capsule in 1960 and you put them today, they would be shocked.
Sure.
By the degree of interracial couples, friendships, relationships, neighborhoods that are integrated. What is Irvine, 20–30% Asian now?
Yeah, but doesn't that make for a more peaceful world? It's off the subject a little bit, but that's how the more we know about somebody else, they're more like us. And
well, this is the niche America plays in the world, is that America is the great melting pot, but the great multiracial superpower, I call it in the book. And it's a unique function that we as a country have that really no other major country in the world has. Somewhat Australia and Canada have a little bit of it, but not to the extent that you have it in the United States. And that's part of our future.
Yes.
You're going to be teaching a class in honors at Chapman University. What's the name of it? It's an interesting title.
It's the history of the future. What we do is we go to the ancient literature. How did they look at the future? And then all the way through Marx and H.G. Wells, and then we look at science fiction and what did the science fiction people predict, and sort of like where did we you know, where were they wrong, where were they right, and then learning from both the successes and failures of prediction, how you can more accurately predict the future.
I'm interested, Joel, in, as an economist in particular, it's, I think, globally, communism has been written off. A command-controlled economy simply doesn't work. But there are various kinds of capitalism, and if you could compare the capitalism of the U.S. with all of the controls and some of the issues that you're concerned about in California in particular, the regulatory environment, versus China, which is increasingly capitalistic, but in a controlled sort of way. What economic model do you feel will best deal with the future challenges facing us?
Well, I believe that you have to allow cultures to find their own level. I mean, in other words, I think it's a mistake for us to say, well, China, you have to have our model, or Singapore, you have to have our model. Their model may work very well for them. There's a degree of control that you might have in a Singapore that you and I would find objectionable. But you know, in a little island with 4 million people of different ethnic groups, with all sorts of historical antecedents, this may work. I think the way America's model works best is if we are successful. If America is prosperous, if America is growing, other countries will, the demonstration effect. If America is failing, no matter how great our ideology might seem, no one's going to want to.
Which led to the downfall of communism, really.
Exactly.
It was so obvious. You look at East and West Berlin, it was so obvious that that model simply didn't work.
And this is, by the way, what happened in China. Not with the United States also, but when Deng Xiaoping met with Lee Kuan Yew, and Lee Kuan Yew said, here's where we are, here's where you are, and Deng Xiaoping, being a very smart guy, said, you know what, we can learn from this.
But also what you're saying is what we're used to and what we've been programmed with and what we've been accustomed to for a very long time is what we're comfortable with.
Right.
And so
exactly.
if we went in and tried to change something, maybe meaning our country, that, you know, that's not going to work.
Well, I think that's, frankly, that's what's happening politically during this fall. I think this is going to be a big issue because I think the president overestimated what the support was for changing some very basic things about how Americans live their lives.
Right.
And there's been significant pushback to that.
What do you feel have been the most controversial aspects of the next 100 million, your book, in terms of outrage and this can't be? You've been on the talk show circuit. Your book has been widely reviewed. What has been most controversial about it?
I think that one, I sort of get it from different sides. One of the major ones is what you might call the nativists, the people who are very upset that the United States is becoming more of a multiracial country, and really feel threatened by, let's say, that we're all going to be speaking Spanish. And I always say to them, find me a kid brought up in the United States for whom English is not their first language. And I don't think you can find it. The other thing that I think I find is people say, suburbia, people are going to continue to want to live in suburbs. Oh no, we're going to all have to pack together in cities. I think that's a great alternative. You look at the data, about 20% of people want to live in dense urban environments. That has held up for 50 years. When you ask young people, where do you expect to settle down when you're older, the largest group says they'll live in the suburbs. They may live in the city when they're young, and then they're going to change. But boy, does that idea get people angry at me, because they have a very fixed idea. And of course, my point is, if 40% of Americans want to live in cities in 2050, fine. But I think we should acknowledge that history has not gone in that direction for a long time, and I don't think it's likely to happen. So that group has been very negative. And then I've had some problems with the Greens, who say, well, we shouldn't have this many people. And I try to point out that, you know, you're not going to have a functioning society if 40% of your population is over 65.
But can our infrastructure handle that kind of a, you know, exponential increase?
Well, I think if we invest in it, I mean, I think one of the great mistakes of the stimulus is that it should have been focused to infrastructure, and it didn't really. About 5% of it went to infrastructure. Yeah. I think there was very wide support, including among conservatives, for big increases in infrastructure investment. And I think that had the president, and I wrote about this a lot, had the president said, this is a time of challenge, this is what we need to do, we need to build new roads and bridges and plant trees and do all these wonderful things, I think he would have had much more support for a stimulus program than what happened.
What do you, if I were right now President Obama and you had his ear, what message would you give him in terms of strategically dealing with the issues we'll be facing over the next 40 years?
I think he has to have a vision of where he wants to take the country that includes the middle class and includes upward mobility. I think there's much much emphasis on redistribution, much too much emphasis on
dividing the pie rather than expanding
exactly.
it.
Bringing the Chicago system, I know that's your
the
hometown.
Chicago school, yeah.
Yeah, but the Chicago
the
system.
Chicago system, yeah.
Yes, you know, you pay people off to get them to go along with you. There isn't enough money to pay off 300, much less 400 million Americans.
No.
So I think he has to be much more enterprise-oriented, entrepreneurially oriented. How do you get small businesses to expand? And I don't think he's shown kind of the economic understanding that, for instance, a man who I thought was much more effective, President Bill Clinton. I mean, you can disagree with other things about Bill Clinton, but he understood something about how economies work. And I think that this is something he's missing. He isn't communicating well with Main Street at all. And when I speak all over the country, I get a sense of people saying, I don't think he understands why I can't hire somebody. As you add more regulatory burdens, you're going to increase the taxes on the small business person. They're probably not going to hire.
You know, as an educator, in addition to being an economist, we only have a few minutes left, but I'd like to finish on this note. Here, I know you're a great teacher. I hear it from students. We're blessed to have you in the classroom. And I'm just wondering, in 40 years, will there be universities like Chapman, or will we be evolving to totally online education? And so specifically, higher education, how do you see that changing?
Well, this is going to be very controversial. One, I think too many kids are going to four-year colleges. A lot of kids are going to schools. They're just going through the motions. That's not the case here at Chapman. It's very, very competitive. I think that what you need to do is do what you can online, but there's nothing like having the professor in the room when I'm with 10 kids and I'm teaching them, and I'm teaching them in part from books I've written. I don't think there's a substitute for that. I don't think there's a substitute for the direct teacher to student ratio. But if you get into a situation, as I went to the University of California at Berkeley, and you go there and you're being taught by a graduate student who's only 3-4 years older than you are, you know, I just as soon do that online. So I think the future of education is either very practical, very cost effective, or this very intensive kind of thing that we do at Chapman. And when I talk to my students, what they love about it is there are no TAs. They're with the professor directly. And when you think back at your college education, you don't really think about anything but that 1, 2, 3 professors who really spent the time with you and that you learned from.
I would agree with that wholeheartedly.
Well, that's a very optimistic note to end on. I'll still have a job in 2050, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'll still be a Chapman.
If we continue to give the kids the one-to-one education, that cannot be duplicated.
Well,
I hope we don't lose that.
That's what we're committed to.
Absolutely.
Joel, thank you for being on the show.
Thank you,
More
Joel.
importantly, thank you for being part of the Chapman University community.
Well, it's my pleasure.